So what I'm arguing is that direct oral conversation is an accommodation, a legitimate accommodation for people with ADHD. Everybody uses it. Neurotypicals use it. People with ADHD use it. The issue is people with ADHD, they need more because of the impairment. So if this is true, this changes everything, because if we can provide direct oral conversation in this situation, or collaboration, there's other things, but I'm just harping on that right now. It's no longer about giving you longer to pain. It's actually providing systemic relief.
Welcome to Successful with ADHD. I'm Brooke Schnittman. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody. We have an old friend, seasoned friend, I should say, Jeff Copper. He is no stranger to the Successful with ADHD podcast. He's a cognitive engineer and ADHD coach and the founder of DIG Coaching Practice. And actually, one of his podcast short form videos went viral on our Instagram. So definitely check our Instagram out if you don't already. But you'll see him talking about an ADHD simulation has gotten millions of views. So we're excited to see what he has to say today. He's the founder of DIG Coaching Practice and host of Attention Talk Radio and Video, where you'll hear and see me too. He developed cognitive ergonomics from the inside out, which is a new ADHD intervention using engineering approach to address executive function challenges. So we've spoken about this in our previous podcast episodes, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it today. And Jeff holds an MBA from the University of Tampa and credentials for ICF, PAC, ADGA, and CTI. He received ACO's 2022 Professional Excellence Award, and his work continues to innovate and redefine ADHD coaching through practical insights and a focus on how minds truly work. So welcome back to Successful with ADHD, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Buck. I'm so grateful you let me come on and talk about this crazy stuff sometimes.
So wild, right? Just wild.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of talk about motivation. We have motivation formulas out there. And we hear, the stories from the past, like ADHDers lack motivation. They're lazy. They're this, right? All those negative, silly messages that we know are not true. So today we're going to be talking about motivation and emotion. So let's just talk about motivation. Let's start there. What is it?
So when you go out there's a lots of literature, but I kind of boil it down. It's an internal force. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take it a little bit further, and I'm going to say it's an internal emotional force. And the reason I think that's important is, like, AI doesn't really have a motivation or emotion to do stuff. It's doing what's kind of programmed into it. So it's really an emotional force that determines what we do and don't do, in very simple terms. Okay. Powerful force.
So in order to have motivation, you need to have an intrinsic emotion aligned with it.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes, but let's kind of pause, because one of the reasons why we're here today is I really have never talked a lot about emotion, motivation, because it's an emotional topic. There's a lot of emotions on the emotion of motivation. Mm-hmm. And today I'm coming in with a new theory of motivation that is more tangible, that takes into consideration motivation, but talks about it in a way that we can begin to engineer motivation. Like, it's a kind of a different concept. And so at its basic form, I think that we need to understand is that everything you've ever done in your entire life, you did it because that's what you were motivated to do. Mm-hmm. Everything you haven't done, you didn't do it when you could have done it because you were actually motivated to do something else. So if we were going to make an objective observation, if you're saying I'm not motivated to do my taxes, but you're doom scrolling on TikTok, well, you're motivated to doom scrolling TikTok. I mean, that's a factual based observation. I think a lot of what we're trying to do is, a lot of people there's some things that I need to do, but I don't particularly like, that I want to do. How do I make that happen? That's
situational variability.
Yep.
Right. I'm going to have some procrastivity here. I'm going to scroll on Instagram, but I'm not going to pay my taxes or do my taxes because it takes way too much executive function. And this is hard.
Yep.
and I'm not
Yes.
interested in doing that.
Yes. Yes. It's just a lot of people look at ADHD as a focus issue. To me, it's an executive function impairment. And often there's an emotional escape from the discomfort of engaging in the problem solving exercise. And you and I have already done a podcast on your channel that went into that in a little bit more detail, which I would encourage people to go back when this is done to reference, because it's an important piece of it. But at the end of the day,
Yeah.
the idea is motivation is motivation. What you do is you're motivated to do it. The trick really is if I'm not doing something that I want to do, what do I do? Lots of emotions associated with that.
And also, and I'm going to ask you in just a second about, like, what do you mean by emotion? But yes, I understand when you have an interest in doing something, you're going to shift your motivation to that other thing. But we know that momentum and motivation really comes from dopamine and from executive function. And so when we have low energy, we have lower levels of dopamine throughout the day, then sometimes we don't shift it to do social media scrolling. Sometimes we just literally need to take a nap or get more dopamine in a more healthy way. So we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about how do you get the right type of motivation, correct?
Yeah. So if I can, because what I'm going to describe is conceptually very different from the way most people look at it. So if I can walk our way through this a little bit to kind of break it down, then we can kind of get into the questions. A lot of my answers will make a little bit more sense.
Okay. Yeah. So you said that the topic of motivation is very emotional. So what do you mean by that?
I say it's an emotional topic because everybody has a lot of emotions about motivation. Like the statement to say somebody's unmotivated, that's an emotional observation. As I said, everything you've ever done, you did it because you were motivated to do it. So in that moment, people are looking at motivation as what you should do, not actually what you are doing. And why is that important? Well, if, like, let's take a kid, like if you've got a teenager and they need to do something and you say you're not motivated to do it, they're really just shaming them. You're not really able to solve the problem. Well, they're on the couch watching TV. Okay, well, they're motivated to do that. The issue really is they need to be doing this other thing. How can I engineer a way to make it so that they'll go do that as opposed to this? That's a way to problem solve what is that issue, not just complaining to your kid and making a statement that you're unmotivated. I don't really know how that actually resolves the problem. In a sense, you just shame people.
Sure. Yeah, no, shame has no space in the ADHD umbrella, if we're going to get anywhere. And I appreciate that as someone who has 2 teenage stepsons and a 4-year-old and a husband we've talked about, who all have ADHD. And I know this is just a little bit of a curveball, but I like to throw them in every now and then. Are you saying that there is no room for the word lazy?
Correct.
For anyone?
Correct.
Okay, everyone hear that?
Yep. But I think we have to take a look at this a little bit differently to understand why I can make that statement. So,
okay.
Cognitive ergonomics from the inside out is a new field of engineering. I don't want to go a lot to it, but it's a model that takes an engineering approach to helping those with ADHD. I won't get into a lot of that, but the model is built on Dr. Barkley's executive functioning construct. Many years ago, like 15 years ago, executive functions were just a kind of a catch term, but there was no unified definition of it. So he sat down and defined very specifically ADHD is a collection of mind tools that you use to solve problems. So like self-awareness is a executive function, emotional regulation, self-restraint, visual imagery, verbal working memory, playing with information in your mind. He defined them very specifically. And so I took a look at the model that he built or defined and have been kind of playing around with it. And part of his model talks about, think of the brain as a 2-level system. You have the primitive brain, which is the automatic brain, the reptilian brain, and you have the executive functioning brain. Executive functions are very effortful. You have to engage them and override the automatic brain. And I'm going to come back to this effortful part in a second because I want to give you an example of what that is. So at its most basic level, you have this 2-level system. And it occurred to me that what if I looked at motivation as a 2-force system? You have your primitive brain that has a motivational force, and you have your executive functioning brain that has a motivational force. So I reached out to Dr. Barkley and I said, has anybody ever looked at it like this? Or have you? And he said, to my knowledge, nobody has, but it's consistent with my model. I tell you, that got me excited. So to me, when we take a look at the automatic brain, we're really talking about our urges. And what that is that urge to escape discomfort or to seek pleasure, to seek dopamine or escape something that's difficult. But that primitive level is driven by our urge to procreate, our urge to forage for food, to come in from the cold, to come in from heat. It's a very primitive motivational system with all animals, and if it wasn't for it, we would be dead. And that is consistent with his model. The executive functioning brain, I'm arguing, and by the way, urges are emotional because you're seeking that for emotional relief. I'm arguing that the executive functioning brain is also emotional. There's a desire for achievement, to accomplish something. But like Dr. Barkley said, the executive functioning motivation is a little bit more effortful. It's more painful. So let's put that into a context. I was a internationally ranked swimmer in college. I used to swim for 4 hours a day. And I used to go to the pool, still do sometimes, and I stand over pool's edge in my bathing suit, and the water temperature is typically 79 degrees. That's cold. Diving in is uncomfortable. There's going to be a shock. Now, often I'd stand there and say, come on, dive in. And I think other people might have had this experience in some level where you're like, okay, go. And like maybe somebody's next to you and you're tricking them to kind of go in, kind of whatever. And I know often I would dive in, I'd swim 25 yards or whatever, and I would warm up. But I literally have driven 30 minutes to get to a pool, got on the pool deck and said, never mind, I'm going home. The point that I'm trying to make is that executive functioning, emotional motivation to achieve requires a level of effort and a level of discomfort that you have to endure in order for that to take place. And so if we take a look at motivation this way, we have two forces. You have your automatic brain and you have your executive functioning brain that are now competing for dominance. I argue is that in a neurotypical, there's an equilibrium. There's a balance of power between these two forces. Okay. Now, this is important, really important. Dr. Barkley defines ADHD as an executive functioning impairment. We talked about this in our last podcast. Executive functions are a collection of mind tools that we use to solve problems. Problems are characterized as things that are multifaceted and ambiguous. So planning is multifaceted and ambiguous. Making decisions, managing time, priorities, they're all multifaceted and ambiguous. So we begin to understand that's where this issue lies. Now, if there's an impairment would mean that it is less efficient or you wouldn't have the ability. So for our purposes, just because the math is easy, let's assume that the executive functioning brain is impaired by 50%. A neurotypical might exert 1 unit of motivation or effort and produce 1 unit of output. A person with ADHD, if they exhibited 1 unit of motivation, they would only have a half a unit of output. There's a difference that's there. In order to compensate for that difference, they would have to exert extra energy, twice the energy or twice the motivation to produce the same outcome. That extra effort is now an emotional cost, right? What happens is that emotional cost swings the pendulum in favor of the automatic brain. So let me go back to it. Imagine I'm at swimmer's edge and the normal pool temperature is 79, but now it's 59. Whoa, that's different. Back in those days, I had body fat of like 5.5%. I got nothing to insulate me. I'm not going into that water. I'm not going to get warm. And so I would resist that. So I'm just using that as an example. So if this is the case, what I'm grateful is the opportunity to come on and share this, because people with ADHD, when you look at them, if they're not doing something that we think that they should do that requires executive functioning, we're judging them as unmotivated. And I'm going, well, no, I'm not so sure they're unmotivated. It's just the amount of motivation that they need. There's a point in time where it's not worth the effort. So they gravitate. And so this force favors the automatic brain. And so there's this disequilibrium where this takes place. And I'm going to go on and talk about this a little bit more, but I want to pause to see if you got any questions so far, Brooke.
You're talking about it as a two-tier system, automatic brain, and we're talking about the executive function brain. And what I'm hearing you say is that there's emotions a lot that are tied into the executive function brain, not only the automatic brain as we
Correct.
know it,
Correct.
where the limbic system is.
Correct.
So when we think of motivation for someone with ADHD in the past or even in the present, we often think that you have to be interested based on it, right? It has to be novel, it has to be challenging, it has to be urgent, right? Dr. Dodson talks about that. And if it's none of those things, then very often we have low motivation for it or low dopamine for it. And then we hypofocus and we actually, that's the situational variability, right? But what you're saying is that there actually is a different way to gain motivation, not just with interest, challenge, novelty, and urgency.
There's a few things in there that I'm going to debunk in a little bit, but for a logical reason. But over what you see a person do, the motivation that you see is the force that won. Mm-hmm. We typically see the impulsivity or that escape because it's the urge that's winning the battle of dominance and is ultimately what's deriving the motivation. Okay? Mm-hmm. So if we go back to where we are and we say, hey, there's this disequilibrium, what do you do? Well, one way is willpower. Now, if you're going to use emotional energy to amp up your emotions, right, to jump into 60-degree water, you're not bringing equilibrium. You're just using more energy, more emotional energy to will yourself through that stuff. And it's really not realistic. You might do it every once in a while, but it's not a sustainable thing because it's not bringing equilibrium.
And then it's adrenaline. It's adrenaline. Exactly. And then you burn out. And there's only so many times you can do that and function daily. Yep.
So that's one. The other one is rewards. And so think of it like this. I was recently in D.C. I was asked to be on a steering committee with a bunch of lobbyists to go through Congress to kind of start helping steer public policy as a result of everything that's been going on. And I happened to be at the Capitol. And I imagine somebody that didn't have any legs at the steps at the bottom of it needing to go up. Now, they don't have a wheelchair and there's not a ramp. I might be able to give them a reward each step that they are having to crawl up, literally on the ground, to crawl up the steps to get to the Capitol. I'm giving them a reward to amplify their emotion to get past the discomfort, the extra effort, and the challenge it is for them to drag themselves up. But once they're up there, do they really want to go through that effort again? If they go back over and over and over, I'm arguing you have to amplify the reward more and more and more and more, and there's a point of diminishing returns. And so you're really talking about giving that reward to amplify the emotion to kind of get up there, and it would seem to help understand why rewards at some level don't work anymore. There's a diminishing return to that. Now, next is accommodations. And there's two kinds. One that's prevalent in our world, and I'm going to pick on one of them, and that is to give people with ADHD extra time. Basically, you get longer to suffer. Think about it, longer to suffer.
Especially if you have anxiety. Yep.
Yeah. So think of it like this. You have 8 hours to do your work. We're going to give you 10 hours to do your work. Well, okay, we're moving from chronic anxiety to acute anxiety, or acute to like chronic, because over a long period of time, you're not really providing relief. You're just really, really trying harder. And if you look at the research, like extra time on tests and stuff like that, it's been proven not to work. But our go-to methodology is, again, these types of things where we're giving people a longer time to really suffer because we're not providing relief for the impairment. We're just giving more time. What I'm arguing with this new model is adaptive accommodations. These are things that provide relief. In our last interview, we talked about an axiom I came with called the intangible axiom, which basically says if ADHD is an executive functioning impairment, and the executive functions are used to solve problems, which is why we have these issues, We understand that language was originally derived for the sole purpose of solving shared problems. Thousands of years ago, I'm hungry. Brooke, I can't kill this thing without your help. I need you to go on the other side. So I start pointing and directing you so we can work together. So oral conversations is the most basic form of problem solving. It originated when we came up with language. So what I'm arguing is that direct oral conversation is an accommodation, a legitimate accommodation for people with ADHD. Everybody uses it. Neurotypicals use it. People with ADHD use it. The issue is people with ADHD, they need more because of the impairment. So if this is true, this changes everything, because if we can provide direct oral conversation in this situation or collaboration, there's other things, but I'm just harping on that right now. It's no longer about giving you longer to pain. It's actually providing systemic relief. So my eyesight is impaired, right? There's no amount I can sit here and I can try to read and I can just suffer. But if I have the accommodation, it mitigates the impairment. If a person with ADHD has a problem solving impairment in mind and they can collaborate, and Brooke, as a coach, you get people to talk through problems all the time, every day. That's what you do to help them solve problems. You're providing them a systemic relief in order to do that. And I'm arguing is that provides the relief. It's not like harder. It's like my glasses. It mitigates it. And so when you talk in collaboration with people, Brooke, when you're working with them to solve problems, they're not having a hard time focusing as much as they would on their own, because you're engaging them in that process. It's providing relief. And now we got equilibrium. It's kind of coming back into balance. People with ADHD are as intelligent as anybody else. The issue is they got to problem solve externally. And in this scenario, direct oral communications is one of those means. And so if we begin to change our view of motivation as this two force system, and we actually acknowledge there's this invisible impairment, right? We can begin to understand why ADHD people struggle. In fact, they're not motivated. It just takes so much motivation for them to do something that they struggle to do that. But we can provide, engineering-wise, if we can make it cognitively easier, we can bring it into balance, and then they will begin to do what they didn't do before.
Yeah. So I know we've spoken a lot about, asking the right types of questions in coaching and in cognitive ergonomics that you've created to probe the ADHDer to think externally with their executive functions. I do, because this is why we love each other. I do want to challenge you on just one thing you did say about additional time and extended time. So I want to see the research, because I believe you. And I would like to say that as someone who was a special education teacher and assistant director of special education, and someone who did get extended time with the 504 in high school and on my SATs, I disagree that it 100% always creates anxiety. I believe that it does work for some people, but it doesn't work for everyone with ADHD, because it's not a one size fits all. Is that if you prompt and redirect and do a separate process system that kind of goes hand in hand with what you were saying in asking the right questions to help the person kind of overcome or not like get to that next level.
So I want to acknowledge a few things. And for podcast purposes and for simplicity, we generalize a little bit, because I can make this far more complicated than it is. When I was talking about extra time, and when I spoke to the research, I was talking about test time. I have that. I can send you that as soon as the interview is over with.
I've got that.
That's got that. The extra time in terms of, to do homework or stuff, I believe, I don't have that research specifically. I don't have it that says it doesn't, but I do know is that it takes me longer to do things, and I get more exhausted as a result of some of it. So I need to be careful with regard to that, because you have a point. But I do simplify these things just for the purposes of kind of what we're doing to kind of move that forward.
Yeah.
One of the things that helped me find this out or to discover this is I'm going to just tell a simple story, because we prefer things that are tangible. We dismiss the abstract. And I remember about 12 years ago, I got a phone call, as I normally do in December, for the freshmen that went to school that were like A students. and they had a lot of help, and now they're on academic probation. So I meet this mother and her student at a coffee shop, and I can tell this kid has to talk out loud quite a bit. And somehow she mentioned he's got a time coach. And I said, well, yeah, I'm sure that it works really well when he's meeting with the time coach, but doesn't at all when he's not. And she looked at me like, as if to say, how did you know that? And I said, well, time coach is working with a planner. That's tangible. What's working is not the planner. It's the conversation that he's having about his day and what he's going to do. And she looked at me and I'm like, yeah, so when he's engaged in a conversation, he's actually talking his way through it, and that's really sticking. When he's not talking and he's got the planner, he's having a hard time. Time is really a visual image. You're seeing the future a little bit. It's kind of hard for me to describe that in the time that we have. And she was like, yeah, just call him up in the morning and say, what are you going to do today? And it was working like a charm. And the reason I'm saying this is in our last interview, I said there's a lot of intangible accommodations that are kind of hidden in plain sight that we dismiss. And I'm using this as an example as having this prompts, or sometimes there's some skills training that we do that externalize it. And sometimes you're actually engaging in oral conversations. If you understand the premise, you can begin to see sometimes, oh, it's the externalization of it, but sometimes there's conversation at different pieces of it that kind of move forward as opposed to just sitting by yourself in a room. So we can, when I start talking about in mind and out of mind, that's a complicated conversation. So I kind of keep it relatively simple. But if a person with ADHD is problem solving out of mind, for our purposes, this, I'm generalizing, they're as good as anybody else. It's when they are on their own, which, by the way, we talked about this last time. Annie Rogers once said, ADHD is amplified or muted based off of the environment. If you're interacting with people and you're problem solving, it's kind of, you have the accommodations. If you're all by yourself, you're not. I mean, I remember when COVID happened, I thought I was going to be out of a job, but my phone lit up like a Christmas tree because everybody was sent home away from direct oral conversations. They thought they had motivation problems and productivity problems. Like, no, you just lost your accommodation. It was like effectively that was really there. And so with all that said, my hope is that this is a new lens that we can take a look at the same problems and begin to see it a little bit differently and not look at people with ADHD as unmotivated. They're very motivated. It just takes more effort to compensate from that impairment. And let's be kind to them and actually look at accommodations that can relieve the impairment. It's a change the way we go about it. We've already talked about direct oral conversations. I mean, there's other things I call like cueing, and then toggling is another real problem with regard to working memory. But the notion of it is, if you look at it as this 2-4 system based off of Dr. Barkley's model, you can begin to see, oh, it looks really differently, and it can explain other anomalies. Now, I want to go back to something else that you had brought up. If you look at it this way, it changes the game a little bit. We use thoughts when we think, but we think in different ways. Like when you worry, you're thinking. When you're daydreaming, you're thinking. We're not using really any executive functions. There's really no effort. I would actually say it's hard to stop worrying. When you're feeling, judging, or forming an opinion, you don't even have to prove it. You can just jump to a conclusion. There's not a lot of effort in that. When you learn, you're digesting discrete pieces of information and you're using executive functions with the purpose of understanding it. This is getting more cognitively difficult at this point in time. Contemplative thinking, where you're looking at data and trying to form a hypothesis, is actually becoming it's more graduate level. But when you cross into problem solving, that's the application of knowledge. You're taking what you've learned and you're applying it to something that's multifaceted, ambiguous, and solving the problem. And in this new model, if you look at it that way, a lot of people with ADHD, when they're problem solving and it's cognitively effortful, they'll escape often to go learn. So think of a financial planner doing a report or a student doing a report. They'll go do more research to learn more about the topic because it's cognitively easier. It's giving them the illusion that they're working on their paper, but through this lens, it's really escape from that discomfort. Why is that relevant? Well, it changes the way we go about it, because if we can provide the accommodation, there's less of an urge to escape the learning, or that notion they're escaping to something shiny and new. I would argue that learning continues to the point in time where the amount of cognitive effort exceeds the reward. It becomes uncomfortable and they bounce off to something shiny and new. But if we can go back and provide those accommodations, I would argue many times they can go further than what they did before. That's why this is different, is it changes the way we look at it. It changes our approach, and it can change some of the outcomes by just looking at it as this 2-4 system.
So, Jeff, for layman's terms, you said that someone who has to do their taxes might scroll on social media instead. Maybe they'll start doing their taxes and then they'll move into social media or vice versa. What do you do? Can you provide a real example of what you say, what your, like, simulate an experience of someone going through your program who is having difficulty in the moment doing their taxes?
Get somebody to help you. Sit down and talk to them about it. I got this.
While doing their taxes or before they're doing their taxes?
Both. Like, let's break this down. The first part of taxes, particularly now, in the old days, it all kind of came in the mail, but a lot of times now you've got to go get stuff. Now, remember, multifaceted and big goes, well, what do I need for my taxes? I need my W-2, I don't know, 1099. I forgot I had an HSA. Like, I don't know. So you're like, I don't even know what to look for. Sitting down with somebody and talking through that, having them prompt you of like, oh, hey, we've got this, da-da-da, and you're talking this. Now you've identified what you're looking for. Where do you go find it? Like, oh, I got to go to this website. Where's my username? Where's my password? That engagement in that conversation process is relieving. It's making it easier. Don't get me wrong. Taxes are not, they're kind of a pain in the butt, but having somebody with you as you're talking your way through that is alleviating it. And I can almost guarantee is if you've got somebody, you might not get it all done, but you're going to go a hell of a lot further than if you're just doing it on your own, because sitting there trying to retrieve that stuff is cognitively difficult. And so the person will end up go do something else. As a result, their taxes, they're not done for 4 or 5 years. But if you take a look at it, the majority of people, and by the way, I am speaking in generalities, there are exceptions to this, but by and large, if you've got somebody that's walking through with it, most people with ADHD will get substantially more done than they would on their own. I was given a presentation to the ADHD Coaches Organization in August about the intangible accommodations we talked about oral conversation. And I remember going through it with a lot of people, their eyeballs were lighting up. And one woman goes, but I coach a lot of writers that are isolated. What do they do? And I remember just blatantly saying they suffer. And I, like 50 people, like you could see this visceral like reaction from all of them on the screen all at one time. And I go, well, I know you're having an emotional reaction to this, but what do I do if I don't have my glasses? I don't read. Like, I'm not going to do it. Like, there's an impairment here. And I was like, they were struggling with it, but it's been interesting since that time. I've had a couple reach out like, well, it really, really works. The issue really is you have to build this into your world. So this is an emotional issue when you have to, like, that's another thing that we'd have to get into, is because people don't want to need to do this, even though that it works. And so I'm trying to make the case that if this is an impairment and if these accommodations work, you might not want to use them. Well, that's fine. But I think that you're going to find that you're going to suffer. Whereas if you own it and you get it, you'll do well. And I argue that the majority of people like yourself and some other people that are experts at some level have let go and have help at some level that are helping you kind of go forward. And there's this people out there that know a ton about ADHD, but they're still trying to be like a neurotypical. It's the ones that let that go and own it that then they kind of cross over. I mean, I remember years ago, I got dyslexia. I can't spell anything. I just kind of gave up. Like, if you got a problem with me spelling, you got bigger issues to do. Oh my God, it was so freeing when I got to that. And I got people that check my work all the time for some of that stuff. So I know that there's an emotional reaction by people with ADHD that don't want to need to do this. But if you look around and really pay attention to the evidence is overwhelming. So let's go a step further. You have problems in every domain of your life: school, work, psychological, society, family. At school, when you have a problem, what's the go-to solution? Go talk to the teacher. Go talk to a tutor. Go to a special ed teacher. At work, you go talk to your boss at first. You go talk to a mentor. You go to teams. If it's psychological, you go talk to a therapist, you go talk to a coach. If it's something else, you go to family members. If it's whatever, you go to customer service. It used to be about direct oral conversations to solve problems. I don't know about you, but it's convenient for them if they don't talk to you and they're shutting off. And I got tons of people with ADHD that they got a problem and it's too difficult to figure out what the hell they're talking about on the FAQ page because they don't answer it and you can't get to a human being anymore. So they just don't do it. And so my point really is it's there. Further, let's go another step. Life coaching. Think about it. It came about not because people needed therapy or they needed mentors. These were people, ordinary people that were stuck in life. They just needed somebody to ask them questions. Life coaching is the Socratic method. The answer's in the question. They just needed somebody to have a direct oral conversation with who would ask them questions for them to figure it out. So I'm arguing life coaching was born for the sole reason that we need to have direct oral conversation to solve these problems, which brings all kinds of validity to what we're doing. Now, having direct oral conversations at one level, but with coaching, there's some belief stuff. So I want to make a distinction, but I'm just sharing all this is evidence that would support what we're talking about that would make it easier.
Yeah. So really what this is doing, because there's a lot of thoughts coming into my head while you were speaking. Yes, our teachers, our parents, our mentors, they can act as our executive function when we are younger because our executive functions aren't fully developed. But what this questioning method is that we do in coaching too, and is supported by that, from what I'm hearing, it's really helping the person initiate and see it through. So they are using their own executive functions and they're strengthening their executive function. So it does become more powerful. And if they continue to practice this, then, we can enhance it, but it is just getting them to start because otherwise they don't know the first step because there's so many different pieces to it.
Yeah. So let's, it's not uncommon, Brooke. You come home, like you got a complicated family, you got a lot going on. I don't know this to be for sure, but let's say this generic is it's Friday, like you come home from work, you're transitioning from work into the weekend and you turn to your significant other and say, let's talk about what we're going to do this weekend. Okay. That happens in houses all over the place. Now, sometimes you have different styles and stuff like that. For many people, they do that and it actually helps them gain clarity on what they're going to do for the weekend. You don't need a coach for this. You just need to sit down. I need goal-directed thinking. Let's kind of talk through what we're going to do and what's the sequence. Sometimes you get to the point in time where you don't get it all resolved because you usually run into ambiguity. But the point really is this happens in households all over the place, but people aren't as conscious about it. What I'm saying is if you're conscious about it and you sit down and say, listen, I just need some help. Let's talk through the weekend and what we're going to do, not as a emotional thing, but legitimate. This is what you got. This is what I got. How we're going to do that is now you're engaging. That's not a coach. And it happens in households across America, ADHD or not. It's there.
Sure.
It's just I'm trying to bring legitimacy to it's a realistic, viable accommodation for people with ADHD to provide relief to the impairment.
Is the goal, or maybe there isn't a goal? I obviously, if you can't see, you need glasses. If you can't hear, you speak in sign language. You might have a hearing device. My question being, someone practices being prompted with questions and then they get started, right? Do all people need the accommodations forever, or are they practicing and hearing the types of questions that are being provided and they can self-coach themselves afterwards?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. So we're getting a little more complicated. Typically, when you're really addressing something new that you're trying to solve a problem, it's hard to get away from this. If it's a reoccurring problem, over a period of time, you get to where you construct kind of a mental model of what that is, and your need for it is less. It's kind of like Mad Libs. You get to where you're not having to rewrite the whole thing. You're just plugging a word in, like what's an adjective or what a verb. That's actually making it cognitively easier. When you think about it, AI, on one level, it's like, hey, here's 5 points. Would you write a letter to Brooke that communicates to that to me? When I'm doing that, I'm just giving it the points, and AI is actually doing the executive functioning for me. So it's an A because I'm not actually having to figure out a way to articulate it, right? Although more and more you have to think about the prompts that you're putting into AI to get out the right output. So there's this thing that's there, but my point really is it starts to get kind of complicated. But when I go back to direct oral conversation, the thing about that is when I'm talking to you, Brooke, I might be explaining something to you, and you look like this. You're telling me, Jeff, that makes no sense. You're not saying it, but you're communicating. I'll correct myself in the middle. But if you're like that, I go, oh my God, I'm on it. So it kind of helps guide you a little bit when you're talking to somebody about what you're talking about, if it makes some sense. And so at one level, some people need it and they need a lot of it. At other level, when we start going to, it's not novel, it's not, you've done this before, the need of it goes less. There are some people, not a lot, that actually can just do it by talking to themselves, where they're kind of answering their own questions. The key to remember is the focus is internal versus external. That's that demarcation I'm talking about. So like if you get timelines out and you write it down on a piece of paper, if you're that type of person, or by the way, people that journal, you're writing out loud. You're right. Not to have the thoughts is not to think, but you write it down. It helps you collect your thoughts because you're externalizing it.
That's how I feel with mind mapping too.
Yep. Exactly. You're getting it out of your head. You're doing it out of mind. Now, a lot of people with ADHD, it's too tedious and boring because they're boredom intolerant by writing all that type of stuff down. But now we can explain why that works or why mind mapping works. Now, you might get all your ideas out on the piece of paper, like that's all there. Now I got to organize them and synthesize them in a way. That's where you might have to interact with some people to say, what if I organized it this way? Or what if I organized it that way? And you're getting feedback because you can organize anything multiple ways. The question is, what makes the most sense for this right now? But this goes back to the fundamental thing, and what I'm grateful for you allowing me to put this out there for you, everybody to judge. I mean, you can think I'm crazy, but I'm just saying, this is what I'm presenting. You can judge it on its own merit. But when you look at it, it's fascinating that if we can actually bring this to everyday people, neurotypicals, where they understand it and it becomes normal. Imagine you go into work and somebody sits down and say, hey, like I go to work and somebody says, Jeff, what do you got to do today? Well, I got to do this. What's hard? What's going to get in your way? Is it possible for you to do all that stuff? They're not solving the problem. They're not doing the thinking for me.
They're talking it out.
They're just helping me. That can be a huge difference. And I'm going to argue that it does happen in everyday life right now. It's just you're not paying attention to it. Nobody defined it for you looking at it. And my goal is to, if we could provide this out there, we can destigmatize this and we can provide relief and have a really profound impact on people that struggle.
So would you say that most ADHDers are verbal processors?
I don't think that's fair to say that because, it's, when you've seen one person with ADHD, you've seen them all. But I would say most of them have to think out, problem solve out of mind. And I guess maybe, let's say over 50%, maybe more, are that you get some benefit from. Oh, by the way, just, you might spend a lot of time by yourself and go, I'm not talking out loud, but it's the conversation that I had with Brooke where I had the aha. Now it's clear. Oh, now I can go do it. It's that aha sometimes that you need to process with the people that makes a lot of sense. When that clicks, it's just a route of just getting it out of your head and write it down narratively. So be careful about what I'm saying is because it's not like you always have to be there. I remember coaching a woman. She was having to do an application on something and she just sat in a room with her husband and she said, this word, what do you think that word is? It was an interpretation issue. Then she asked him, hey, about something else. And all of a sudden she got it done. There wasn't much interaction. Or before the pandemic, I was coaching this woman about go look at procrastination. It's rooted in ambiguity. And she was arguing with me. Lockdown hit and I got a text, oh my God. And I called her up. I go, what do you mean, oh my God? I'm sitting here doing a procedure on the computer and I forgot a step. And I realized normally I lean over to somebody next to me and I ask them and I have the answer within 2 seconds and I'm right back in business. Well, today she sent an instant message to somebody, sat there for a couple of minutes, didn't know if the person's at the desk, even looking at whatever, went up to go get a cup of coffee and never went back. And now we talked about it and said, hey, the answer's on the company's intranet somewhere, but she didn't know really where it was. And I'm sharing this. This is a moment, a Microsoft moment in what could be 4 hours, which is the difference between productivity and not. Just because there's somebody there to have that oral conversation with, and forgive the vulgarity of this, it's the shortest way I can describe it. Woman walks in, asks her husband what's on TV. He said dust. That's when the fight started. So what's on TV? The content of the Flintstones or the dust? Often you're online and you're like, What does that mean? But they don't define the words and you can't talk to anybody. These are the paper cuts that are the difference between ADHD productivity and not. Just saying, hey, Brooke, what do you think they mean by this? If you say what I think, that's giving me validation. If it's contradiction, it's there. That sounds small, but it's huge in terms of ADHD productivity. And again, it all goes
Yeah.
back to that clarity and ambiguity and how do I interpret something, et cetera.
Yeah. So what you're saying for everyone listening right now is that motivation can be enhanced with ADHD through questioning. And we know that emotions lie not only in the automatic nervous part of the brain, but it also lies in the executive function part of the brain. And we are not lazy with ADHD. We're just motivated on something different. And you help to.
Yeah, I'm saying you're as motivated as anybody else, but you need adaptive accommodations for the impairment. If you get adaptive accommodations for the impairment, you can form just like everybody else, and you'll find you're motivated like everybody else. That's the trick. You got to get the accommodations that relieve the impairment. That's the key difference. And if you do that, you're going to motivate. You'll like look at you. I mean, you've kind of built an empire over there, right? And I know you got a team of stuff that you work with and that stuff. So you're highly, highly motivated. There's been times in your life, we haven't talked about, I think that you struggled at some point in time. I know I did, but I don't know that, but I would argue a lot of times is when you were off on your own. So the idea really is,
oh yeah,
you're highly motivated.
I need a team.
Yep.
I need a team. I talk things out all the time with my assistant. For example, today we had our meeting. We have a biweekly meeting and I just put an idea on there. And I said, okay, so I just need you to stay here for a second while I talk this out. How does this sound? And I hear myself talk, and then she'll give me some pointers or say yes, no, like essentially she's doing exactly what you're talking about. And then the idea comes to fruition because it's something that is talked
100%.
out. Yesterday, I spoke with two of my coaches and two of my assistants, and we were talking about a new model of coaching that we're doing. And we talked out all the details. I saw things that I couldn't have seen without. So it's problem solving with other people.
100%. That's a perfect example.
Yes. Yes. I also, to this point, a lot of people love body doubling with ADHD, and a unique type of body doubling where you don't just stay quiet while the other person does a thing is talking things out like this, right? Okay, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? When is it going to be done? And then the person goes back and forth so both people can get the thing done that they want to get done. So I know that's very helpful for a lot of my clients as well.
So that's just funny. People call me up and I say, oh, what's your expectation of what I'm going to do that would help you? It's one of my favorite questions. And some people go, I need accountability. And I go, well, why don't you go call your mother? Like, if you think about it, having somebody nag you, did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? You kind of avoid those people. However, if you're with somebody and you're talking through the problem, that's not accountability. That's a thinking problem. Don't confuse the two, because if you say I need accountability, people are going to nag you. You're asking for the wrong thing. If you say I need a thinking partner, right, it'll work. And I do a lot of, if you look through this lens at that, you can begin to see these small distinctions that are huge that define not that it works, but why it's working. And again, I go back to that. And your example of what you talked about is perfect. I routinely get on Zoom with my assistant and I just go through my inbox talking about, I got this, I got that. I get so much more done. I mean, I don't even think that she even needs to see it, but I'm referencing it sometimes, and it's a whole heck of a lot easier. And so one of my hopes is that if you have ADHD, you're motivated, highly motivated. You're just having to overcome this invisible impairment that nobody can see. Don't let society beat you up. Number 2,
amen.
Get the accommodations. I know it's hard. There's ways that people, I always tell people, Brooke, has anybody ever come to you in their entire life and said, can I talk through something, or can I talk out loud? And you had the time. If you didn't have time to understand and you said no, like in your lifetime, I think you'd be surprised.
It's like a gut punch. Yeah.
Yeah. Most people don't do that.
It barely doesn't happen. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of people with ADHD, but I can't do that. Well, no, you can't. So when I'm coaching a lot of people, I'm like, we've got to build your board of directors, right? A group of people that you can call up and say, hey, you got a minute? I just need to think out loud. And you can reciprocate for them. It's doable. It does take a little bit of effort, but I think that you'll find if you build your board of directors, it will be infinitely easier than just slogging it out on your own. So
100%. And you've helped me do that with my bullying survey. So appreciate that.
actually, that was funny. If we can talk about that, I'm a big fan of yours. You had this great thing, and I said, "Come on my podcast. I want you to talk about this thing first. I want me to ask you a whole bunch of questions. Why don't you go back and read it?" I did that deliberate, because I wanted you to talk about it to get your head around it a little bit. That was very intentional. And look what happened.
Yes.
Immediately published with it here pretty soon, it's a spectacular piece. And then the sequel that we did was also spectacular. That was actually just brilliant. So anyway.
I can't wait to listen to it. But Jeff, thank you so much for sharing your excellence and your grace in the challenging questions and back and forth that we have. I think this is definitely a safe place and it's an open place. And I appreciate you bringing new knowledge and new nuggets to the community. I know this is going to land really well with our community. So appreciate your time.
Let me get this back. Number one, I'm so grateful for having me on, but I'm also grateful most hosts won't ask questions like you're like, I'm going to challenge you. I thank you for doing that. I thank you for doing that for two reasons. Number one, I need to be challenged, but your listeners also, they're questioning this thing too. And I'm saying you're bold enough to do that. Most people wouldn't do that. And that's why I consider you such a thought leader. You're questioning this stuff, rightfully so. So thank you.
Thank you. And I know we're going to put it in the show notes, but where can people find you and learn about the program?
digcoaching.com is my website. If you just go to cognitive-ergonomics.com, that will take you straight to the page. You can find it on my website. You can also get to my website, my YouTube channel, all that kind of stuff there. But digcoaching.com is the best place to go.
Awesome. Thanks for listening to this episode of Successful with ADHD. I hope it helps you on your journey. And if you need any additional support for you or a loved one with ADHD, feel free to reach out to us at coachingwithbrooke.com and all social media platforms at Coaching with Brooke. And remember, it's Brooke with an E. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.